He threw the folder across the table, and our daughter's face crumbled like a wet paper in a storm. I remember the exact words he shouted to the school board and principal, loud enough for the janitor outside to pause mid-sweep. "She is not my child. She is a whore's mistake." I watched our daughter, Emily, only 12, flinch and drop her pen, her tiny fingers trembling. The room went silent, deadly silent. My legs shook, but my heart stayed still. I had died in that moment, but not the way he expected. What died was the woman he thought he married. What was born was the woman he never saw coming. Before we dive into this story, I want to say a massive thank you to all my beautiful subscribers. You all are the heartbeat of this channel. To the new and returning viewers who are yet to subscribe, I cannot wait for you to hit that subscribe button. That is the fuel that powers me to keep bringing you these raw, twisted, romantic stories from real hearts. Do not forget to comment below. I want to read your reactions. Let us continue. I am Rachel Anderson. I am 42 years old, born and raised in Tulsa, Oklahoma. I was a devoted wife. A soft-spoken mother. I made lemon pies from scratch every Sunday, never missed a single parent-teacher meeting, and ironed my husband's shirts with care, collar first, just the way he liked. My daughter, Emily, is my soul stitched into skin and bone. And that man, Andrew, was my husband of 17 years. A man I met at a church retreat. A man who once whispered into my ear that I was made from the silk of heaven. But silk burns easily. And that day at school, my entire world went up in flames. Emily had been having trouble at school. She was withdrawn, anxious. Her grades dropped. She came home one evening with a busted lip and mascara she never wore running down her cheeks. She would not talk. Not until a week later when I was called into the school to meet the principal. They said she was being bullied. Harsh words scribbled on her locker. Rumors. Ugly rumors. About her not belonging to her father. About her being the bastard child of some mystery man. Another parent had said it. Then a teacher overheard a boy saying Emily's father was not her real father. They said kids do not just make that up. The principal called Andrew to join us. That was when everything snapped. He walked into the office like he had been waiting for this day. Like he had been storing a demon in his chest and now it wanted to scream. He threw down a folder, one I had never seen, and told the room he had run a secret paternity test on Emily 2 months ago. She was not his, he claimed. He shouted it like a man proud to be betrayed. Like a man who wanted to punish the whole room, not just me. And in doing so, he punished our daughter. I tried to defend myself. I told him there was no way. That the test must have been wrong. But he kept yelling. Called me names I never imagined hearing from his lips. Called our child names that made the principal cover her mouth in horror. Emily's eyes were frozen. She did not cry. She did not speak. She simply stood and walked out of the office, disappearing into the hallway like a shadow vanishing at sunset. That night, he packed his bags. He did not even look at me. Just left with the line, "You know what you did." And that was that. No conversation. No goodbye to Emily. He vanished into the wind like a ghost with a grudge. I sat on the edge of the bathtub, fully clothed, numb, staring at the floor tiles. I replayed our entire marriage like a broken film reel. I remembered the way he used to touch my lower back while I cooked. The way he said my name when he came home late from work. The way he used to sleep with his hand curled over my hip like I was his lifeline. But the truth, like all poisoned roots, started to reveal itself. Andrew had changed. Over the last 2 years, he had become distant. He began taking business trips that left no hotel receipts. He smelled different. Sometimes he came home with the scent of another woman's perfume buried in his shirt collar. But I never asked. I was too afraid to know. And now I wondered if this whole humiliation was not born out of betrayal, but projected guilt. Emily fell into a deep depression. She would not eat. She barely spoke. She shut down like a house with no power. I was furious, at him, at myself. But most of all, I was burning with the kind of rage only a mother could feel. The kind of rage that turned pain into something darker. Something sexual. Something vengeful. Then came the call. His boss, Mr. Lucas Granger, called to ask about Andrew's sudden absence from work. I told him the truth, or at least some version of it. He invited me to dinner. Said he had some documents Andrew forgot to hand over. I almost declined. But I did not. Something inside me had awakened. And I was done letting the world walk over me. I wore a black dress I had not worn in years. The one Andrew used to say made me look like temptation dressed for war. I applied red lipstick, deep red. Blood red. And I wore heels that made my legs look like long roads to places only the bold dared to travel. Dinner with Mr. Granger started formal. Civil, he was tall. Handsome. Polished in a way Andrew had never been. His eyes stayed on mine too long. He said I looked stunning. I let the compliment slide across my skin like silk. Over steak and wine, he mentioned that Andrew had missed multiple meetings. That he had been showing signs of mental instability at work. Then he dropped a bombshell. He told me Andrew had been having an affair with his secretary. And not just recently. For over 3 years. The weight of that revelation did not crush me. It fueled me. Like gasoline to my rising flame. And as Mr. Granger reached across the table to gently brush a crumb from my lower lip, I knew. I knew that I would make Andrew regret the day he ever dragged our daughter's name through the mud. I would show him exactly who I really was. No more crying. No more quiet dinners. No more pretending. I was going to burn down every lie he ever built, and I was going to do it with the same lips he once swore were made for prayer. And I would start with his boss. I was never the kind of woman who looked at a man across a dinner table and imagined revenge. I used to think those women, those calculating, seductive, emotionally armored women, were broken. Damaged. Dangerous. But as I sat in the passenger seat of Lucas Granger's black Mercedes, his hand resting ever so lightly on my bare thigh, I realized something tragic and beautiful. I had become one of them. And it did not feel like destruction. It felt like resurrection. The drive back to his penthouse suite in downtown Tulsa was filled with silence that spoke more than words. The kind of silence that trembled between two bodies aching for permission to unleash what had been hiding behind their smiles. Lucas was a man who knew power. But what he did not know was that I had already made up my mind. He opened the door for me like a gentleman, poured me wine like a host, but I was no longer anyone's guest. I had walked into his space like I owned it. And for that night, I would. He set the wine down. I stepped closer. I let him undress me, not with haste, but with awe. I watched the look in his eyes shift from curiosity to hunger. He kissed me like he wanted to erase every lie Andrew ever laid on my skin. I let him. When his hands roamed lower, and my back arched to meet his mouth, I did not think of Andrew. I thought of my daughter's face in that principal's office. I thought of every tear she cried alone in her room, and every night I had to whisper through the walls, "You are mine. You are enough. You are loved." This was not about sex. It was about reclaiming something he stole from me, dignity, power, pleasure. And I took it all back in the most wicked way possible, by making his boss moan my name into the night. The next morning, the sheets smelled like sweat and vengeance. Lucas watched me from across the room, bare-chested, sipping his coffee with a sly grin that told me he already knew he had crossed a line. But he had no idea that he was just the first domino. He asked me, half-jokingly, if this was revenge. I told him, without a smile, this is just the beginning. And I meant it. Emily was still withdrawn. She barely touched her food. She still walked the hallways of school like a shadow, invisible and wounded. So I started changing things. First, I showed up to the PTA meeting in that same black dress, with my shoulders back and lipstick like a scarlet flag of war. The same mothers who whispered behind their coffee mugs stopped mid-sentence. Some looked away. Others looked stunned. I smiled at all of them. And when Andrew's mistress, a blonde secretary named Fiona, strutted in with a new bag and freshly done hair, I walked over and gently placed my hand on her shoulder. I leaned in and whispered, "You will lose more than your job. I promise you that." She laughed, too quickly. She had no idea what I was capable of. Not yet. I began gathering evidence. Not for court. For destruction. Lucas helped me. He forwarded me emails, confidential reports, Andrew's expense receipts, hidden funds, corporate secrets. I saved every file. Every detail. I watched the man who once mocked my silence begin to sweat without ever seeing my shadow. I learned that he had paid Fiona's rent. That he had funneled money out of Emily's college fund for a down payment on a private cabin getaway in Colorado, for her. Not for us. I felt disgusted. But the pain did not kill me anymore. It only sharpened me. One evening, I dressed in a white robe and met Lucas at the cabin Andrew had paid for. He gave me the keys. And I set it all up. I printed out the bank statements. The DNA test. The emails. I placed them in a manila envelope labeled Truth. I lit candles. I set the mood. I made the room look exactly like the fantasy Andrew thought he was building for someone else. And I waited. He arrived, as Lucas had arranged, under the impression Fiona had planned a surprise. He walked in wearing a smug grin. That grin vanished the moment he saw me standing there, in nothing but the same robe I wore the night of our honeymoon. He opened his mouth to speak, but I raised my hand. "Sit," I said. And surprisingly, he did. I tossed the envelope on the table. He opened it. I watched his face twist and collapse under the weight of betrayal. Not mine, but his own. I told him about Lucas. About every scream. Every moan. Every night his boss had me while he was too busy hiding his lies. His hands trembled. I leaned forward, looked him dead in the eyes, and whispered, "I am the woman who loved you more than life itself. But now? I am the woman who will make sure you watch your entire world fall apart. One dirty secret at a time." He lunged at me, but I was ready. I stepped back and pulled out my phone. One click, and Lucas's security team came in through the side door. Andrew was dragged out of his own fantasy like a dog caught in filth. But I was not finished. I sent the same envelope to the school board, the HR department of his company, and to Fiona's pastor, because yes, she sang in church choir on Sundays. It all came crashing down in one glorious, symphonic collapse. Andrew was suspended from his job pending investigation. Fiona was dismissed with a public notice of moral misconduct. And Emily? She came home from school that week, smiling. She hugged me and said, "Mom, no one talks anymore. They just look away. Like they are scared." And I smiled back and said, "Good. Let them be." Because I was not just the quiet wife anymore. I was the storm they never saw coming. The fire inside me no longer burned with rage. It burned with precision. By the time Andrew's life was unraveling, thread by miserable thread, I had already laid the final brick of my revenge. The difference between petty retaliation and poetic justice is that one is loud and clumsy, while the other is quiet and permanent. What I planned for the end was neither spontaneous nor kind. It was methodical. Layered. Ruthless. It had to be. Because when a man points to your daughter in front of strangers and calls her a whore's mistake, you do not just break. You evolve. He was under corporate review, his assets frozen. Fiona was hiding somewhere out of town, fired, disgraced, and exposed. Emily had begun to come back to life. Her laughter returned like sunshine leaking through a broken roof. But I wanted more. Not for me. For Emily. I needed the truth, not just the betrayal, but the root of it. The why. So, I went to my sister. Her name was Dana. She had been suspicious of Andrew for years. But like any loyal sibling, she kept quiet unless asked. Now I was asking. She told me something that made my stomach twist like a towel being wrung of every drop. 3 months before our wedding, Andrew had slept with her roommate. A woman named Kimberly. That was not the worst part. Kimberly had gotten pregnant. And Andrew, desperate to cover it up, convinced her to terminate the pregnancy and swore he would never speak of it again. He told Dana it was a mistake, and if I ever found out, it would destroy me. But Dana had kept it buried. Until now. That night, I pulled out the DNA test. I stared at the numbers again. Then I did something terrifying. I took another test, but this time, I used a private lab I found in Austin. I paid for express results. I sent my own hair sample and Emily's. 5 days later, the envelope arrived. I held it in my hands like it was a live grenade. I opened it slowly. And then I cried harder than I had in 17 years of marriage. Because the first test was fake. Emily was his. She was, and had always been, Andrew's biological daughter. The man who had humiliated his own child had done it not because of truth, but because of guilt, shame, and cowardice. He had faked the test results to justify leaving. He needed a story that made me the villain. But the truth? The truth made him a monster. I did not call him. I did not scream. I simply waited, until July 4th. Independence Day. The irony was too delicious to resist. Every year, Andrew's company hosted a fireworks gala on the company lawn. Clients, partners, and executives all came with their families. It was a tradition. That year, even with his suspension, he managed to get an invite. He probably thought it was a chance to clean his name. I had something else planned. Lucas helped me secure a spot on the VIP stage. He told me he had only seen one woman pull off something this savage before, and she ended up owning half her ex's company. He said he was proud of me. I kissed him, right there in front of everyone. And then I walked up to the mic. They thought I was going to sing the anthem. Instead, I told them a story. About a man. A respected man. A husband. A father. A man who accused his own daughter of not being his, in public. A man who shamed his wife, humiliated his child, and left with a woman he had been seeing for years behind everyone's back. I told them about a fake DNA test. And then, I held up a new envelope, the real one. I opened it. And read the results aloud. Emily Anderson, 100% biological daughter of Andrew James Anderson. The crowd was stunned. Andrew stumbled toward the stage like a drunk in a thunderstorm. Security blocked him. Fiona was nowhere in sight. Lucas leaned over and whispered, "Would you like a glass of wine after this?" I smiled and said, yes. But only after the fireworks. Because behind me, the sky exploded with color. And in front of me, Andrew collapsed into a chair, a broken shell of a man. The final twist? I had already served him court papers. Filed for sole custody. Filed for child endangerment. Filed for emotional abuse. My lawyer handed them to him moments before the speech. There would be no redemption for him. No second chances. No coming back. I walked home with Emily that night. She held my hand tightly. She looked up at me and asked, "Why did he do it?" I knelt beside her and said, "Because some people would rather destroy others than admit they destroyed themselves." She nodded slowly, eyes wise beyond her years. Then she asked, "Are we going to be okay?" And I looked at the stars above us, loud, bright, unapologetic. I said, "We already are."